On tonight's agenda, we have a presentation by Brooklyn Borough Hall team member, Kathleen Daniels. She will discuss a march that the Office of Brooklyn Borough President is hosting on March 14th. Kathleen, please come forward. You don't have to be shy. You can give her a round of applause. Just in case anyone's new, I am Ingrid P. Lewis-Martin. I am the Senior Advisor to Brooklyn Borough President Eric L. Adams. I want to welcome you. On my right, I have our Deputy Senior Advisor to Brooklyn Borough President, David Johnson, and we also have my Executive Assistant, Keisha Humphreys. So we want to welcome you. Kathleen?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. On March 14th, the Borough President is supporting students who want to speak out against gun violence. After the massacre at Parkland, the Borough President convened a meeting of students, parents, and faculty here at Borough Hall. There were over 100 people here, the overwhelming majority of which were students. And the students asked for several things. One, they wanted schools to become a more friendly environment, programs like No One Eats Alone, to be sure that the loner is not alone all the time. They wanted more information on civic engagement and lowering the age for voting. And they absolutely wanted a student bill of rights, learning how to push power and how to impact change. The students voted that they will join the Borough President. He was going to support them by sponsoring some buses to take them to Washington, D.C. on March 24th for the March for Our Lives. And they overwhelmingly voted to participate in the National School Walkout. That's next Wednesday, March 14th, from 10 a.m. to 10:17, 17 minutes, 1 minute for every student and faculty member that was gunned down in Florida senselessly. The Borough President, being a parent and having parents on staff, cannot support walking out of school, but after school from 2 to 5 p.m., there will be a rally that the Borough President will host where students will speak out at the Prospect Park Bandshell, students who have lost siblings and parents to gun violence locally. We've invited some students from Parkland. We're waiting for confirmation. There'll be performances. Joey Badass is one of the confirmed artists, and activation stations throughout the Bandshell area on voter registration, participatory budgeting, civic engagement, how to get involved from community board to neighborhood advisory boards. They'll have an opportunity to call their local elected officials and in a bipartisan manner to call them about gun control, about taking money from organizations that support the lack of gun control, and about violence in schools. So we ask you to help us in amplifying the voices of students. This is about the youth. 50 years after the assassination of Dr. King, the youth are going to take charge and march on Washington, and we could not ask for a better group of advocates to fix some of what we've let go awry. So we have a stack of flyers for you in the front for the rally, the National School Walkout Rally from 2 to 5 p.m. next Wednesday in the after-school hours. It is absolutely free. All are welcome, and this is for students citywide. We have students boarding yellow buses from Queens and Manhattan to come and join us. So please help us support our youth, amplify their voices, and make our schools gun-free zones. Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen.
So do we have any questions about the rally?
Yes, sir.
My question is, what if students decided they want to walk out of class? Will they be penalized?
Well, the Department of Education has not yet responded to our emails regarding whether or not citywide they're formally supporting the National School Walkout, but there are many, many schools that over 48 that we have seen so far that are going on social media, and the schools are engaging the students and assisting them in formal walkouts. And we're talking public, private, charter, all across the city. We are seeing that schools and faculty and staff are assisting in that manner.
Okay, just a reminder, please speak into the mic, state your name and your community board. So please, sir, would you say your name and what board you were from, please? Thank you.
Barrington Barrett, Community Board 17.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? No other questions? Going once, twice, 3 times? So Kathleen, I want to thank you very much for your presentation. We're going to have, I shouldn't say a special guest because we're in the guest's home actually. The Borough President will join us for the second portion of our presentation. This evening, we are very honored to have with us Commissioner Banks, who is the Commissioner of the Department of Homeless Services, Social Services, which includes homeless services. Commissioner Banks has a number of members from his team who are here with him, so I invite Commissioner Banks to please come forward. The VP is a little late. We have to move. Oh, he's here. He's coming now. Okay, so he's here. I had started for you, BP. You know you always say the show must go on. So the VP's here, so he'll tell you a little more about Commissioner Banks, and then Commissioner Banks will introduce his team.
Thank you, Ingrid, and good evening, everyone.
Good
Everyone's doing well. We received so many inquiries about the homeless situation in the city, and we just thought it was important to, since we already have these meetings that Ingrid chairs, to allow the commission to come in and speak with you directly, answer your questions, get your questions answered as much as possible. I think probably the most important thing that many have asked throughout these last few years around the homeless crisis is how do we build trust, and how do we make sure that we establish a very trustful relationship. And I think that that question mark is getting more straightened to an exclamation point by some of the acquisitions and hiring that was done. One hire in particular that I just really want to point out that's here with us today is former Councilwoman Annabelle Palmer, who's here, and just her dedication and commitment. Those of you who knew her as a council person knew how she was, on the ground, and she was real about making sure that the voices of people were heard. Now I know that she's part of your team, Commissioner. I think that's important. And many people know this homeless crisis is a serious issue. It has divided houses. Even here in Borough Hall, for the first time, I see my senior advisor, who has been with me for years. We're on two different sides of the issue. So there's no easy answer to this. There's no easy way to deal with the fact that we have thousands of New Yorkers who are homeless. And how we come together to make sure that we allow people to transition back into real housing. That's the conversation. How do we build communities and support systems to ensure that people can make this transition? Homelessness is a serious issue. It's a serious crisis that we're facing. Number one issue we have in Borough Hall. The number of calls we receive of people who don't have housing. And those of you who are on the boards, you know it as well as I do. So I'm not only singing to the choir, you wrote the song. You're clear on the number of inquiries you receive, the number of people who are losing houses, the over-aggressive landlords' behaviors. And, really, as I said with the commission a couple of months ago, we were together at a site. The finger has not been pointed to the impact that Governor Cuomo and Bloomberg did to start this crisis. This crisis was started when we took away the supplemental income housing rental programs in the city. And for someone to throw a rock, hide their hand, and when your head is bleeding, give you a Band-Aid as though they didn't throw the rock initially, we need to really look at that. And they have been free of criticism that to take away those programs that allow people to have a supplement rental income, and devastated the program. Following that, you saw this housing crisis that we are witnessing now, and that continue to grow if we don't do something with it. And so, without any further ado, I think it's imperative for the commissioner to come forward, give his vision, and then open the floor to allow you to ask whatever questions you may have so that he can answer to the best of his ability. And I please don't take offense, but in a minute, I'm going to have my food come in to eat because I am hungry. I've been running all day, so I don't have enough to give all of you, and I know many of you are not a vegan, so, I'm going to let you do your thing after you finish the meeting, okay? So thank you, Commissioner Banks.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Borough President, for having me. We go back a long way. I guess we shouldn't admit how long we go back. We're very young people, I know. Let me just introduce you to people who are here with me this evening. And to my immediate right is Jocelyn Carter, who's the administrator of the Department of Homeless Services. Annabelle Palmer, who's a deputy commissioner at the Department of Social Services, directly with me, former council member in the Bronx, and also was chair of the General Welfare Committee, which oversees all social services for a period of time. Matt Borden, who many of you know, assistant commissioner, heading up our community affairs efforts. Perry Litton, I need no introduction for him, right? Everybody knows Perry, he's the nice guy. Inspector DiBartomeo is from our NYPD management team, which oversees our shelter security operations, and Darren Martin, who keeps me out of trouble most of the time. I appreciated having this opportunity. When the borough president and I first started talking about some of the challenges of homelessness about a year ago, and then intensified, I think one of the key things that's important is communication. And so the opportunity to speak at this Borough Board meeting seemed a good opportunity. I am a former community board member. I would love to go to every meeting in the city, but I don't have the ability to do that, so the Borough Board provides that type of initiative. I'm not sure how many of you understand the structure. I was originally the commissioner of the Human Resources Administration, and the Department of Homeless Services was broken out of the Human Resources Administration about 20 years ago. And about halfway through the administration, the mayor asked me to conduct a 90-day review of homeless services. Hadn't been done in 20 years. And one of the things that we focused on was by splitting up the two agencies, it was a very difficult thing for clients because they had to navigate multiple agencies when HRA had the ability to prevent people from becoming homeless, and they ended up in shelter. And the decision was made to integrate the two agencies just a little less than 2 years ago. And I ended up being the commissioner of both the agencies as the commissioner of the Department of Social Services. Some of you also know that I spent about 33 years suing the two agencies that I run, which gave me a particular insight into the kinds of problems of our agencies, both for workers and for clients. About a year ago, following the 90-day review, the mayor issued really a blueprint for addressing homelessness in New York City. It really has 4 pillars: preventing homelessness, getting people off the streets, rehousing people, getting people into housing, and transforming our approach to shelter. The background is really, as the borough president said, homelessness has increased 115% between 1994 and 2014. First month of the Giuliani administration, there were about 24,000 people in shelter. First month of the Bloomberg administration, there were about 31,000 people in shelter. First month of the de Blasio administration, about 51,000 people in shelter. What happened between the beginning of the Bloomberg administration and the beginning of the de Blasio administration? As the borough president said, the state and the city eliminated rental assistance. So the shelter system ran between 2011 and 2014 without any focus on housing. The Advantage program ended. In that 3-year period, homelessness went up 38% in our city. The analysis that the city's Office of Management and Budget has done shows that we should, based upon that trajectory, have about 71,000 people in our shelter system now. We have about 60,000 people in shelter now. We have much more work to do, but I can tell you that some of the things we have put in place over the last 1.5 to 2 years have begun to take hold. Because for the first time in a decade, the shelter system census has remained flat. First time in a decade, system has remained flat. Again, at 60,000, we have a lot to do to move it in the other direction, but we've broken the trajectory of growth that we had seen pretty steadily for the last decade. If you look at each of those 4 pillars of our initiative, you can see the different things we're doing. And I want to really be very specific about some things that we're doing that affect all of you, affect the constituents that you serve, and I'm clearly going to leave some time for questions. So first and foremost, we have invested a tremendous amount in preventing homelessness. Who here has been to housing court? Go ahead, you can, right? People have been to housing court. You know that for years, the landlords had lawyers, the tenants did not. And a lot of people lost their homes and ended up in the shelter system. So we've invested in a universal access to counsel so that over the next 5 years, every low-income tenant below 200% of poverty, so about $50,000 for a family of 4, will have a lawyer to represent them. We have already begun that. We've increased the amount of funding for legal services from $6 million in the last year of the Bloomberg administration to $77 million this year. And we're already beginning to see the impact. Evictions by city marshals are down 27%. Overall, about 70,000 people have been able to remain in their homes already as a result of the beginning of implementing over these 5 years access to counsel and housing court. It's an important thing. If you've got constituents, we can help connect you with lawyers who can help prevent people from becoming homeless. In terms of street outreach, obviously we all see people on the streets of the city and the subways in our daily lives. People didn't end up on the streets one day. It's a long series of things, and it's hard to bring people off the street. It takes an average of 5 months to engage people. I can tell you that over the last year and a half, we've been able to bring in 1,480 people from the streets who've remained off the streets. And we've done that by doubling the number of outreach workers that are on the streets and by doubling the number of special beds, safe haven beds, to help bring people in off the streets. We have replaced the program that the borough president talked about the state and the city ending with our own rental assistance programs, largely funded by city dollars. Some state dollars, but largely funded with city dollars. And through restoring priorities for the city's own housing programs, we've been able to rehouse or avoid becoming homeless 71,000 people. And we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep providing rental assistance to try to keep people, enable people to move out of the shelter system. The last thing that we're doing is the hardest and is going to take the longest, which is transforming the shelter system that's existed over the course of 4 decades. I can remember when I was a brand new legal aid lawyer representing clients who lived in Brooklyn who were placed in shelter in the Bronx, and clients from Bronx who were placed in Queens, and clients from Staten Island who were placed in Manhattan, and the children having to commute all around the city to get into shelter. That's my lens that I look at this problem. And so we looked at this, the way the shelter system developed over the course of 40 years in a very haphazard way. Shelters aren't located close to the anchors of people's lives, and they tend to be concentrated in certain areas of the city, not all over the city. Both the mayor and I have spoken about the fact that there's 1,300 people in the shelter system from Staten Island, and there are only enough capacity to house people in Staten Island for about 140 people. So all around the city, we're looking at mismatches, and what we're committed to do is to transform our shelter system into a borough-based system. So if you're from Brooklyn, we're going to give you the opportunity to remain in shelter near your children's schools, near your work, near your health care, near your houses of worship, near your family and friends. This system's built up over 40 years. We're clearly not going to do that overnight. But in the first year, I can report to you that we're making progress. So we committed to shrink the size of the DHS shelter system by 45% by closing 360 shelter locations in the cluster shelter program. Some of you are familiar with this. This was started by the Giuliani administration, in which apartments were rented and used as shelter. They could have been used as apartments, but they were rented as shelter. The buildings have been allowed to deteriorate in terms of conditions, and so we're closing those over the course of this 5-year plan. And we're also getting out of commercial hotels over the course of 7 years. Commercial hotels date back to the Lindsay administration. Some of you who have studied history may remember that workers from my now agency put families up in the Waldorf Astoria during the Lindsay administration. But again, these changes can't happen overnight. We're under court order to provide shelter to people, and even if we weren't under court order, I think we want to make sure that people have a roof over their heads and don't end up in the streets. I think some of you have traveled in the West Coast, understand what the streets of Los Angeles and the streets of San Francisco and the streets of San Diego look like. There are 46,000 people living on the streets of Los Angeles. We have about 3,900 people living on our streets. From our last count, we want to stop that, but we have a lot of people in shelter because we do have a right to shelter. The progress that we've made is we started with 360 cluster apartments, some in Brooklyn, some in the Bronx. That was the primary places where the cluster program began. And we have been able to get out of 1,500 of them, 42% we're out of. And we announced that we're going to pursue a process of purchasing, going to court if necessary to take the buildings, about 800 additional cluster apartments so that families can remain in them, either those families or other families in our shelter system. So the cluster closure plan has already resulted in 42% of the apartments in this 18-year program being closed, and we have another 800 on tap to literally buy or help not-for-profits buy those apartments so that we can preserve those for low-income housing for the clients that are in them or other clients in the shelter system. That will end up with about 60% of the clusters being closed, and we're going to keep doing that. We have, when we did the 90-day review, we were confronted with 12,000 violations in shelters. That built up because of lack of inspections, because of lack of investment in improving conditions in shelter. In 2016 and 2017, we've done 34,000 inspections. We've cleared about 12,000 violations. Most of the rest are capital improvements that we'll be making to improve those conditions. We're clearly using hotels as a bridge. We've committed to get out of them, and you might say, well, you committed to get out of them, why you're still in them? We've been very transparent in saying we're prioritizing getting out of the clusters first. We will continue to use hotels because we have a court-ordered obligation to provide shelter, but we will be getting out of the hotels as part of the plan as well. But we don't want to leave people out in the streets. We certainly increased our hotel usage during this recent period of very cold weather, where we wanted to make sure we had people inside. The NYPD is supervising security in order to improve safety in our shelters, and we think putting the NYPD in charge has really improved the conditions in shelters. More and more single adults are coming into our system. On the one hand, that bespeaks the dimensions of the housing problem, but it also answers the question that people say, oh, I don't want to come inside, I'm afraid. The NYPD is really helping us with that. And we've invested in the not-for-profits. For years, the not-for-profits have said, we don't have enough money to provide services. We've provided social workers in the family shelters so the children can have access and their families can have access to social workers. We made an investment of $200 million in the not-for-profits to be able to provide better services to people while they're in shelter. We've also announced 17 of the new shelters that will replace the closing of the clusters and the hotels. A lot of the focus in the public discourse has been on the 90 shelters that the mayor said we would open. It's important to remember those are replacements for 360 locations that we're getting out of. So that's, again, how we're shrinking the footprint. We've announced 17 of the new shelters. 11 are already up and operating, 9 in the Bronx, 5 in Brooklyn, 2 in Manhattan, 1 in Queens. And we're continuing to receive proposals for new shelters, and that will accelerate our ability, or help us accelerate our ability to keep closing the locations that we were in. Obviously, there are problems of the past. When I was a legal aid lawyer, when I started as the HRA commissioner, for years the city would open things, no communication with people. At every one of these new shelters, we gave at least 30 days notice, which is what the mayor and I committed that we would do. And the average period of time between notice and opening was 65 days. For years, the city used hotels, and you wouldn't know whether they used the hotel or not. We committed within 24 hours of emergency use of a hotel, we will provide notification, and that's what we have been doing. We get a lot of inquiries from people that say, hey, there's a hotel, the hotel owner says you're going in, and we are very honest. We say we don't have any plans to go into this hotel. On the other hand, I'll be honest with you, if the temperature goes down to 5 degrees again and I need to find a place, I will be very happy to have somebody who's willing to take people in on our way to implementing this plan to get out of hotels, to end clusters. We still have an obligation every night to provide shelter to people. Look, I'm as impatient as anybody in the city for change. Again, remember, I sued the 2 agencies I now run for many years. But I can see for the first time in our city an actual concrete plan that we're beginning to implement. I also completely understand, and I think the borough president said it well, that people can have divided opinions on things. And we're here to try to answer people's questions and give you the basic facts. If it wasn't true, it was hard to imagine why someone would run for mayor announcing, I'm going to open 90 shelters because we need to replace the capacity. The mayor did that last year because we looked at what was needed to actually address this problem. And it's a combination of, as I said at the beginning, prevention, bringing people in from the streets, rehousing into permanent housing people, and transforming our approach to shelter. As part of rehousing, we're even now bringing on supportive housing. First couple hundred units have come on of the mayor's 15,000 unit supportive housing plan. So we want to keep working with you. We know we're not always going to agree, but at the end, we think the shelter system that we will have will be one that's appropriate for people. It will enable people to be housed in their borough. We'll be done with clusters. We'll be done with hotels. We'll have a very robust program in place to prevent homelessness and to rehouse people who do become homeless. A top line that's important, I think, for everyone to know, when we began the 90-day review of home services in 2016, we were in 203 different locations in Brooklyn. We're currently in 146 locations. And we've been doing that even as we've had to use additional hotels, even as we've opened new shelters, because we're closing things even as we're opening things. We're going to redouble our efforts to make sure you know when we close things. You hear from us when we open things. We want to make sure you hear from us when we close things. So I appreciate having the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have. And if I can't answer them, I know my colleagues will answer them for me.
Great, thank you so much. The first down on the end, just say your name, mention your name, and then Plateau, and then we switch to you, okay?
My name is Barrington Barrett, and I'm the chair of Community Board 17. My concern is that when these shelters are being opened, we only notify the community like a week before, telling us we're having a shelter. My concern is why can us be notified in advance so we could work with the community to let them know what's coming in. My second question is, have you been working with the Board of Education to facilitate these families who are coming in with children and how they will attend school?
Those are two great questions. First, again, the mayor's commitment and my commitment has been for any of these new shelters to give 30 days notice before we open the shelter. We give that to the elected officials, and we're giving it to the community boards as well. That wasn't the case in the past. Wasn't the case for many, many years, including at the beginning of our administration. But we made a change in policy a year ago. We think it was the right policy. And as I said, for these 11 facilities that are already up and running, we've announced 17 of them. 11 are already up and operating. The average time between notice and when we actually opened them was 65 days. Hotels, we're making a decision literally in the middle of the night, and we will inform electeds and the community board within 24 hours of doing that. Because we're not planning to use hotels. If we have to use them, we will use them. In terms of the Board of Education, we're both dating ourselves. In terms of the Department of Education, the importance of the borough-based plan I can't overemphasize here, which is the purpose of the plan is to address that thing that I described at the beginning, which was the idea of families from Brooklyn being in the Bronx and Bronx being in Brooklyn and Staten Island being in Queens. We want to be able to give families the opportunity to be placed as close as possible to the anchors of their lives. In this transition period, we clearly are not able to deliver on that for every family. But for the new facilities that we're opening, we are delivering on that for the families that are getting into them. At the end of the plan, we will not have the kind of problems that I just described to you. I'm from Brooklyn and they placed me in the Bronx. How do I get my kids to school? Of course, there'll always be cases of domestic violence survivors. That's about 30% of the clients that come to us in families have a history of domestic violence, and there we're obviously going to place for safety reasons. But I think the problem that I have seen, and I think you are alluding to, of the school is challenged with crowding to begin with, and then the facility is there. We want it so that if I'm Steve Banks and I'm a fifth grader, I'm going to be able to stay in my school, and so we're not seeing the difference that we have seen for all these years where, oh my God, you open a shelter, now we see an impact on the local school. But we didn't get to this really difficult situation overnight, and I want to promise you I can solve it overnight.
And I see one more. Can you, Commissioner, just drill down for a moment, because I just want to make sure that we understand the answer to the question, because that was an important one. You said borough-based placement, not community-based placement, correct?
The idea is to get you as close as possible to your community, but I'll give you an example. When we opened the Bergen Street Shelter for Senior Citizens, a lot of discussion about that. We opened it, and we gave an opportunity for all of the senior citizens in the surrounding sort of concentric circles, and we filled it up with people from that area, but then there were some people from other parts of the borough who needed some help too. So our focus is to get as close as possible. If I, God forbid, Steve Banks and his family comes homeless tonight, to get me as close as possible to my community, preferably in my community. But we want to make sure I'm in my borough so I can get I can get my kids to school, I can get to work, I can be, connected to my house of worship. It is a community-based approach within this borough-based framework.
Richard Flatteau, Community Board 3, that's Bedford-Stuyvesant. I'm not sure if you saw this article. It came out yesterday.
Which one is it?
Kings County Politics.
It's wrong.
Okay, so
I saw it this morning.
the article is about 529 Monroe Street.
Yep.
And I did some research myself.
Yep.
It's a 14-unit building, and it was illegally converted to 43 units in SRO. And it was a contract let, I guess, by your agency.
HRA, not for homeless services.
Okay, but from my understanding, there were homeless that were moved into the building.
Not correct, and I can tell you that we've removed everybody from this building as soon as we learned of this problem. There's nobody residing in that building who's an HRA client.
Okay, but I have a bigger problem, and that's that there didn't seem to be any communication between the Department of Buildings and HRA, because, you could look it up yourself on the Department of Buildings website, and it says it's a 14-unit building, yet there was a group that was given a contract, and it was housing, I think, 40-plus people, and it was being used as an SRO, and this was going on for several months.
Right. You're absolutely right that there was a problem here, and as soon as we focused on what the problem was, we removed all the people, and we're going to redouble our efforts to avoid this kind of thing happening again.
Do you know, excuse me, when the people were moved out?
I don't recall if it was yesterday or by this morning.
Okay,
it's
so
in the last
it was
couple-
when you saw the article, basically, when somebody told you about this?
No, it was when the program told me that there was a problem in this building, and as a result of that, I looked into it and I said we should remove all the people from the building.
Okay, but in the future, will there be any more due diligence in terms of checking the Department of Buildings records and make sure something like that doesn't happen again? Because the people like on the block, they were up in arms. They were sending a lot of complaints to the community board office, and people were wondering how could a 14-unit building end up with, 40-plus unit SRO illegally.
It wasn't the kind of thing that we want to have happen. I appreciate your concern about it. I can assure you that I'm concerned about it, and we will focus on it. I also appreciate always we get information from community boards, and we actually do say, maybe we don't know all the information, and the community board knows more than we do.
Well, at first there was pushback. We did contact HRA, and nothing seemed to happen until the article came out yesterday.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to, again, say what I said, which was it wasn't a situation that I would like to see repeated. When we learned of it, we began to remove the clients. We completed the removal either last night or this morning. Okay. I'm not sure when it was completed. But I'm not pushing back to you on that it was a situation that shouldn't have happened.
I just want to zero in on what Mr. Flatteau stated. I'm a little bit more concerned than what happened at the build. I'm a little bit more concerned with your outreach than what happened at the building. We're going to have people that's going to abuse the rules, but I'm concerned with you stating that you reached out.
Right. The initial response was that either the building owner or the operator was going to try to get the C of O amended However, we had contacted the buildings department, and they told us that it wasn't possible to convert a Class A building that was 14 units into, 43-unit SRO. So when the article came out, that's when, I guess, you took action.
I'm going to say again,
The initial response was that they were going to try to convert.
I just want to make sure the record's correct here. We took action before the article came out. The matter was brought to my attention last week, and we addressed it. I understand, and I don't disagree with you, that it was a problematic situation. And I agree with the borough president that one aspect of what you said is, I heard very clearly what you said. When you first reached out to us from the borough, from the community board, you didn't feel like we handled the complaint properly, and I will certainly address that as well.
So one of the things that when we sat down and spoke with the commissioner a couple of months ago, was to get someone on the ground that could be the interface between communities, the shelters, to make sure the quality of life issues, and that's Sam, that's here. So, I think that, Richard, what you just raised is important, that when we identify problems, particularly when it comes from the community boards are is the entity that's on the ground. If you see a response like that, what Richard just shared with us, then you should also turn it over to Sam. So our office, we will be diligent about making sure that those responses are not ignored. Sam is operating out of Borough Hall. He's assigned to the agency, but he's operating here out of Borough Hall. We interface with him all the time, and so something like that, you reached out to the agency. There was no real response for whatever reason. Sometimes things slip through the cracks. We don't know. But we would like to also play a role in making sure something like that is responded to.
I appreciate that point. Sam's position was very important, we thought, in terms of being able to make sure that there's another eyes and ears on how things are going. This wasn't a DHS shelter site, but I think, in my view, it's certainly within the purview of trying to make sure that our agency is as responsive as we can be.
Teresa Scavo, Community Board 15. Commissioner, you opened up tonight in your proposal mentioning the word communication. One of my colleagues, Chair, used the same word, communication. How could you expect a community board to sit back, receive an emergency, 30-day emergency declaration with no input from the community you're placing a shelter in? I cannot believe someone who is not a community resident knows the community like we do. Where we live, we know where the mass transit is. We have a shelter that came through on an emergency declaration, and from the minute we heard, we said, how are these people if they've got to travel? There's no mass transit there. There is no transportation there. They would have to walk long distances if they had to get their children to school. No one checked the school, not until certain of the elected officials got together and tried to get to the bottom of all this. And we were just greeted, well, that's it.
Which shelter is this, ma'am?
It's the lighthouse at the end of Emmons Avenue.
Right, so that's a very good example of what I'm talking about. You're making a point, and I want to make a point back to you. Clara's house was open way before any of this happened, and we're trying to transform the system by making it so that sort of thing doesn't happen. But we can't do it overnight. I wish I could close every place over. Could I just finish?
No, hold on, but let him finish.
Okay.
I wish I could close overnight all of the 360 locations that we want to close. We'll certainly look at the Clara's house situation and see whether or not it should be in that group or not. But you're describing a situation in which it was before we had the plan, and the plan now provides for us to focus on, are families with children going to be near the schools that the families came from? Are people going to be near work? Are people going to be near health care? Are people going to be near houses of worship? but it's a multi-year plan. And as I said, I'm as impatient as anybody in this room, but I'm also realistic, and I don't want to mislead you, that we can't do it overnight. But you're describing a situation in which a facility opened before we had any of this plan in place.
So my question is, these new shelters that are opening in Brooklyn, you're going to have people on the ground that know the location. And is it near buses? Is it near trains? Can people easily walk, if need be, to a religious affiliation of theirs, or the schools in the community? It just seems to me, we have two of them like a block away from each other. It seems so haphazard. No one stepped back and said, well, that poor family, the family center, the Bay Family Center, they walk out. If they just want to walk to McDonald's, there's nothing there, nothing. They would have to walk, I couldn't even tell you, down many blocks to even get to a McDonald's. There's absolutely nothing there. So I'm just hoping before you proceed with these shelters in Brooklyn, that someone on the ground knows the district, knows traveling there, what amenities may be there, to help a family live.
I appreciate your point, and I've made this offer a number of times, and I know Community Board 6 has taken us up on this offer. In the Bronx, Community Board 7 recently took us up on this offer. If there are sites in your community that you think we should be developing as shelter, because you know we're closing things, and you know the things in your community that you want us to close, hotels and clusters, we're closing them, and there's going to need to be some replacements. Our offer to all community boards across the 5 boroughs has been, and I'll continue to make this offer, if people have sites that you think would be better for facilities to meet the needs of people from the community, as the borough president and I were focused on, we're more than willing to participate in a process with the community board to move forward with those kinds of sites.
Thank you.
And we've had good reception so far.
And I think that's is an important offer, because I think that you really hit it out the park on the, there's no greater impediment to a person getting off homeless than not having access to go apply for that job,
Exactly.
to go for that school. So I think that it's important that as we look at this problem, to have that feedback from the community boards that can have a family or individual placed in a location where they can have easy access to the services
Exactly.
that they need. That was a
Thank
great
you.
point.
Thank you.
Musa, and then Community Board 7. Musa first, and then 7.
I should just add, Matt, if I could just
Yes.
make one more comment. We expect very shortly to be reiterating that commitment that we've made in a correspondence to all communities. So you'll see it in writing. It's real. We do welcome people's input.
Musa Moore, Chair, Community Board 9. First, thank you, Borough President Adams and Ingrid, for organizing this ability to dialogue about this issue, because it's definitely a major issue. Over in Board 9, as you're aware, we have our shelter that opened up on Crown Street. And my question is, how are we monitoring what takes place in these shelters after they open and the contract has been granted to whomever the nonprofit is? Reason being, within the past couple weeks, we've had residents come in complaining about harassment, complaining about issues going on with staff. We've had community residents complaining about late night activities. So who's monitoring the coming and the going of the residents, and who's monitoring from the city what is being done in regards to these shelters? Now, I did reach out to Matt and Perry, who we had a discussion, which I thank you for that, but what is the follow-up? How are we handling that?
That dialogue actually illustrates two things that are good. First of all, we do monitor, we do regular oversight. Jocelyn Carter, I know, is dying to tell you what she's been putting in place. She's a social worker. She really cares about individuals, and I think is bringing a new level of service delivery. So you have from us looking out, but also you reached out to us, and a particular staff person is no longer employed by that shelter provider. So we do take action ourselves, but we certainly welcome action back to us. Now, obviously, that contrasted with the situation that you experienced with Monroe, and we're going to look into that, but there's a two-way dialogue, which we do appreciate.
And the big picture is that we do have, I think everybody can hear me.
No, please use the microphone because we need it.
So the big picture to answer that, and the commissioners talk about this one issue that you raised, but every shelter that we open have what we call a program administrator who's in charge of that shelter, right? So they have staff that go out and do inspections, and they're random, and we show up at whatever times of the day. But anytime we hear of anything that's untoward, we do investigate. We do pay attention. We do want to hear from you, because what I bring is 14 years at DHS, but looking at services that we provide, but also treating clients with dignity and respect. So just like I want to be treated, I want clients to be treated that way. And anytime we hear of anything that's not correct, we want to look into that, and we absolutely do that. So it's, I have staff at every level that's doing that, including going into the building and doing investigations. So anytime, and we welcome that. So Matt and Perry are our ambassadors, right? So you're communicating with them, then my staff hear about that, and we do the follow-up that happens with that. So thank you.
Actually, Jocelyn's being too modest. She's talking about her 14 years at DHS, but before then, she worked for not-for-profits, she worked for other agencies. She's really devoted her life to social services. And I should also say that every family is required, the provider is required to create an independent living plan for the family. And part of the monitoring is to see, are those plans being created? Are they being fulfilled? And there's a randomness. Obviously, we can't look at every single family's individual file, but you look at enough to get a sense, is the provider performing or not? And so your complaint combined with our monitoring led, I think, to a good result. Does that mean that there'll never be any complaints? Probably not. But it means that you helped us get on top of a situation, which we appreciate.
Community Board 7.
Good evening, Cesar Zuniga, Community Board 7. Good evening, Borough President, and thank you, Commissioner. I want to just preface my question and comment by saying that I don't envy you. You have a tough job, and I think we should recognize that. And I want to concur with some of the other folks here about how important this issue is. And because it's so important, I really do think we need to get it right. And I think we, meaning society, okay? Because people don't wake up one morning and decide, oh, I'm going to be a homeless person, right? It's a whole universe of factors and variables that come together and push people out into the streets and into other people's homes. And it's important to mention that it's not just people living in boxes or in shelters, but it's people who are doubled up, tripled up, quadrupled up in some of our communities. Having said that, I want to just sort of join the chorus of folks who are frankly dissatisfied with the way that your agency has been engaging with the community. And I don't say this to sort of put you on the spot or to be cute, but again, I go back to how important this issue is and the role that we play in the community as people who are trusted opinion leaders, trusted folks who deliver an interface between the community on the ground and you guys in the agencies. And so I really think that moving forward, we really do need to sit down. Maybe it does, obviously it's not going to happen tonight, but we do need to sit down around how do we communicate better between particularly your agency and community boards. So I will just sort of end it with, there's a series of events that have taken place in my community in Sunset Park. We've extended an invitation to you to come to our community to talk about this, and I want to continue to extend that invitation, and I can guarantee you it's going to be a productive conversation about finding solutions, because I think really that's ultimately what we all want, and the invitation's open.
So let me be frank with you about a couple of things. I know in the Sunset Park community in Board 7 area that before we did the 90-day review, before we put in place all of the new things last year, that there was a situation in which the city went in and was using a hotel as a hotel, not telling anybody in the community, and then transformed it into a permanent shelter. That can't happen under the plan that we announced a year ago. That cannot happen. That would not happen under the plan we announced a year ago. By the same token, I know, and it's not just here, it's all over the city, people are not happy with the hotel use. But I'm going to just continue to be honest with people, which is to say Until we complete the transformation of the system and close down the clusters and get new shelters up, we have to use hotels as a bridge. And we welcome engagement with any community, Community Board 7, to develop a new shelter. Let me respectfully say this in public, why I have to decline your invitation, and I want to continue to offer an opportunity to sit down with Jocelyn Carter, who's the administrator of this agency. I have an administrator for HRA, an administrator for DHS. If you look at every community board in the city, I could not run an agency that serves 3 million people with 16,000 workers in multiple sites throughout the city if I went to every community board. Now think of the following. You're in the Bronx community board meeting, and I say that up there, and the only community board I go to is the one I used to serve on. In fact, the one I live in. How is that fair for the city, that the commissioner goes to the one he lives in, that he used to be on, but not the rest of the city? And if I went to every single community board to have personally a conversation with every community board, we couldn't be changing the system. So I have to ask you to accept our offer back of Administrator Carter to come and sit down with you and go through these details. I would love for you to accept that offer back.
Offer accepted.
Great.
Because I think this is not about getting into some, tit for tat about who's going to be accountable. So offer accepted. And again, I want to be real clear that I totally get, what you're doing, what you're saying. In fact, I'm really sort of appreciative of the fact that your whole initiative is premised on the idea that we have to tackle some of the root causes. But again, I want to come back to, I don't think, well, personally, and I think in my community, we're not taking issue with your ultimate outcome and how you want to transform the system. We're just really wanting to have a deeper conversation about how we communicate and how we engage with each other. So I'm happy to sit with whoever you designate. Everything you said makes sense about why you can't personally come, but I think we want to put a spotlight on this and make a substantive conversation between the agency and the community.
We're ready to work with you. We have Annabelle, we have Matt, we have Jocelyn, we have a whole team. We're ready to work with community boards to help find locations. As I said, we just had a fantastic experience with Councilmember Cohen and the community board up there in terms of them identifying a site that we just notified on. We're going to open it in a matter of weeks, and we thought it was a really good process. I also want to just say clearly again, there's been a lot of stuff that's gone on for many, many years that I get are built up in communities, including some things that we did at the beginning as we were looking for how to solve this before the mayor put all the agencies together and we put this plan out. And I realize you can't run away from how people feel about a lot of things that went on over many, many years. I appreciate that you like our vision. I also appreciate that you actually want dialogue with us. I also want to say, it's possible that we'll do something to annoy you even while that's going on, because we still every night have the obligation to provide shelter. But where we're going, I think, is where everyone in this room wants us to go, which is to prevent homelessness anytime we possibly can, bring people in off the streets, rehouse people into permanent housing, and to transform the way we provide shelter so that people are connected back to their communities and can be as close to schools, jobs, healthcare, houses of worship, and family as possible. The road to go forward is not going to be a straight one, but I appreciate that you're going to accept Jocelyn, who's terrific.
Thank you. Just want to say one thing. I do also want to recognize teachers because when we did open the 49th Street site, he came to all the meetings and was incredibly supportive, even in that situation.
Even the fact we didn't get it right.
So I appreciate that.
But we have new rules now to make it not possible to not get it right. But I appreciate even in a dark moment you were there with some bright light.
And I see all your hands, trust me, and I'm going to get them all. Also, please speak into the mic. Open meeting laws is being taped, so we want to make sure that what you're saying is being heard. I have Joy, and then down on the end, okay?
Okay, hello.
I'm sorry,
everyone.
I didn't see where you were coming from.
Yes,
Apologize.
again, Joy Simmons from the Office
Good
of
to see
Council Member Inez Barron.
Yep.
Question, do you have any special shelters or section of shelters or provisions for, well, I guess provisions, but any particular shelters or sections for elderly or disabled homeless people? Because we find that we've had a few seniors come in and they didn't really want to go to the general, population, and some disabled.
As part of building the new system, and I think you said it well, the system as it exists now is haphazard. That's our word, and I appreciate it's your word too. So, for example, the shelter that we opened on Bergen Street is for seniors, senior men. And that's the first of its kind in Brooklyn. And we will be continuing to look for special populations. We just opened, I realize this isn't your question, a shelter for LGBTQI young people. It's the first one in the city. We opened in Councilmember Torres' district up in the Bronx. We've recently come to a settlement and a long-standing lawsuit about providing access to clients with disabilities. And so we have an expert consultant that's analyzing our whole system to ensure that we're providing the kind of access that we should. So again, tonight, if you ask me how are things going, I'm going to say we're making incremental progress. When we sit down the next time, I'm going to tell you we've made even more progress to address the kind of issues that you raised, because I think those are very much what the plan is all about, meeting people where they are and having services that are really to give people a helping hand.
Okay, can I ask a couple of more? Okay. How does the housing specialist assist with residents in finding housing? I'm finding that when we have persons coming to our office that are part of the shelters, we're getting that the housing specialists are not really that helpful to them. I mean, it may be just the particular shelters, but in terms of just giving them all the possible information, we know it's limited. It's not like they could say, okay, well, here's an apartment that you can apply for and you get it tomorrow, right? Because we know there's issues, but at least we're finding that we're giving information that the shelter housing assistant didn't give them. And it seems like they would be giving them all the information that's possible.
So, first of all, we have excellent housing specialists who are connecting people to housing. That's how the 71,000 people moved out. On the other hand, it's a challenging housing market. The problem of the increase in homelessness is against a 10-year period of time between 2005, 2015, when rents went up about 19% and wages went up less than 5%. And that's the market our housing specialists are working in. Having said that, what Jocelyn described as the program administrators supervising the shelters offline, if we could get a little information about which ones, we're going to take a closer look to see is the client really just reflecting the realities of some of the challenges we have in the housing market, or is the client not getting the services that they should?
Particular one.
And
okay.
we would love to know more information so we could follow up and try to address the situation.
Okay, and if there's an altercation, say a shelter resident gets into an altercation, is an incident report filed on site, or is it not filed on site? It has to be filed, say, with the police department?
If there is an incident in the shelter, it must be submitted to us centrally, and us centrally includes the NYPD management team that supervises and trains the security staff.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if there's a particular problem with what's happening with reporting from a shelter, we would want to know about that. The NYPD management team has come in and really, I think, professionalized our approach. They're bringing community policing into our shelters. We just opened, or I guess in a couple of weeks, we're opening a new training facility for our peace officers. And we're taking very seriously making sure that people are safe in shelter. Having said that, domestic violence among families is one of our biggest challenges in shelter. It drives people into shelter, and it also occurs in shelter, and that's a particular issue that we're very much concerned about.
So an incident report should be filed on site.
So let's play this out a little bit. Something happens to me, you're my worker or you're the supervisor, and I come and I speak to you. There should be a report created on site and then submitted to us centrally so that we can review it and make sure appropriate action is being taken.
Okay. And finally, the hotels. Are residents, are you still utilizing the hotels?
Yes, and again, the reason for it is we've laid out very clearly that our goal is to stop using the clusters, this 18-year-old program started by Giuliani administration, and to get out of the hotels, which off and on back to Lindsay, but we prioritize getting out of the clusters first. And we've gotten out of 42% of them already, and we're going to keep going, and then we will turn our attention to getting out of the hotels. But it is a clear commitment, and we have the ability to do it as long as we can open up the replacement shelters, and we're on pace to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, down on this end.
But doesn't mean, if I could just, Mr. Borough President, doesn't mean that tomorrow you might say, man, darn it, that commissioner came and said, we're getting out of the hotels, and they opened another one. I'm being very transparent. They're a bridge to getting the system changed. And it can't change overnight because it didn't get this way overnight.
Okay, 1, 2, and then 3.
Good evening, Borough President Adams, Commissioner Banks, Glomani from Councilmember Levin's office. I want to thank you for being here this evening. I just want to harp on one issue, step apart from what was mentioned so far this evening, and bring up Link and SEP's vouchers, which seems to be the issue, a big barrier which many folks face. As you know from general welfare hearings, our office assists folks citywide who reach out from shelter and either have issues receiving assistance from their housing specialist, or who otherwise should be eligible for some kind of subsidy or voucher, yet are unable to receive those vouchers, and those typically end up impacting what we find to be senior citizens, often medically frail senior citizens, and in many cases, the undocumented population. Just today, for instance, we had a gentleman from Carla's Place who reached out and has not been getting the assistance that he needs in those cases. So my question to you is, what role improvement upon the voucher system would play in assuring folks get the permanent housing that they need to get them out of shelter, particularly those who may be medically frail senior citizens?
So good question. Let me, first of all, I should just say, not to embarrass anybody, but I think the chair, Councilmember Levin, has done an extraordinary job as chair of the General Welfare Committee. And he's been really zeroed in on the issues that we think are important ones. And there's been a very good dialogue for the first 4 years, and I'm sure it's going to continue. In terms of a number of issues that you raised, I think first and foremost are the program improvements and oversights that Administrator Carter and I talked about. By investing more in the not-for-profits that are running the shelters and making a number of the oversight with changes within the agency, we think we're going to get a better, a more effective housing specialist work. But as we've been saying in this meeting, we always do want to hear about complaints that may come to electeds or to community boards about particular shelter, particular housing specialists, because we're reinvesting enough in the not-for-profit providers that we should be reducing the number of these kinds of problems. And by problems, I don't mean I can't find an apartment. I mean my worker's not responsive, I can't get stuff. Then there's I can't find an apartment problem. And that's really reflective of what I said before, that you've got a real limitation of the numbers of apartments that are out there. Having said that, the 71,000 people that have used the vouchers or the rehousing programs have certainly benefited from it. I think there are two problems that we see in the marketplace. One is source of income discrimination. There's a local law that prohibits landlords from saying, I don't take programs, or I don't want Link, I don't want FEPS, I don't want this. By the way, many of them say they don't want these things because of what happened to Advantage that the borough president described. And we have a source of income discrimination unit that we created in the Department of Social Services, and we're beginning to bring cases. And any information about particular landlords or brokers that say that to you or clients or whoever, the more specific we can get. It was Steve Banks working for XYZ broker, or Steve Banks we want to know the information, and we will go after them. And we have been doing that. I think the other problem is, in part, the reality of the public benefits or public assistance benefit system in New York State, which is the state sets the allowance level, the city administers it, and there are limitations on what we can do as a local district. We have been very creative in pushing new programs out, even within that context, and we have a number of proposals that we're engaging the state with in terms of streamlining the programs that we created on our own. Some people have said, why do you have 6 links, SEPs, FEPs, it's all these different programs. We rolled them out one by one within the context of the complex relationship in which the state is our supervisor and we're just the administrator. And our hope now is, after 4 years of experience of running these programs, that we can make it a lot simpler for landlords and for clients and for all of you to understand, and that's what we're engaged with the state now to try to streamline the program.
Thank you. Michael Toomey, council member with Jamani Williams' office. Good evening, Borough President, Commissioner.
Good to see you.
Commissioner, I wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You were looking to acquire about 800 clusters for conversion into low-income housing. I was hoping you could go into more details about that, how it's going to roll out, what the timeline looks like, and on a broader scale, what kind of cooperation social service will be doing with HPD and Advance and their affordable housing program and your plan to end homelessness in the city.
So let me talk about the cluster conversions, because that's something we're directly involved in. So we announced, the mayor and we announced in December that we had identified 25 to 30 buildings that were in the cluster portfolio that contained about 800 cluster units that the city had been paying for a shelter, and about 300 other units of low-income tenants in those very same buildings. And that we had identified a legal tool to use to acquire the buildings for low-income housing operated by not-for-profit community-based housing developers. And that the city would provide financing to those local groups to purchase the buildings. And if the landlords declined to purchase the building, sell the buildings to the not-for-profits, that we would take them through a legal proceeding called eminent domain, which means the city can go to court and take that property, paying the landlord compensation, not taking it without paying compensation, as long as we have a public purpose. The public purpose here is to end the cluster program and to provide more permanent housing for homeless families. So it's a targeted group of about 25 to 30 buildings, altogether about 1,100 apartments, 800 of which are being used as clusters. The permanent tenants, the 300 or so permanent tenants, would get permanently affordable low-income housing with rent-stabilized rents, and the other, the 800 units that city have been using as clusters for many years could be turned into permanent housing, either for the families currently in them, or if the family in that particular unit had another need for some other kind of housing, another family would move into. The mayor and I said that we expected to come to either a out-of-court negotiation concluded by the end of the year, or to commence some of the litigation proceedings by the end of the year, by the end of the calendar year 2018. So that's the situation we are. There were lots of questions about which buildings and price, and we said we didn't want, we couldn't get into public debate about issues that really would potentially end up in court, but that we saw this as a very important new tool that we were using that hadn't been tried before.
Kim Robinson, Representative Councilmember Alika Samuels. Unfortunately, both of my questions was asked by these two gentlemen and answered. Thank you.
That's fortunate. Okay. Yes.
Hi, Janice Morgan, Community Board 16. My question is, and I'm not sure if you have these numbers, but if you don't, it would be helpful if they could be provided. Do you know, in response to the 60,000 people that are still homeless, the waiting list for housing, do you know how many people are waiting for housing? So if this 60,000 has been flat for the last few years, you know, when can we expect for that number to actually drop again? Because if the people that are on the list for housing are more qualified and able to, you know, afford the housing, then that means we have a problem that may not actually be fixed for many years. So what are we doing about that?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I realized in asking the question that I should have been clearer about the following. What we've held flat is the size of the DHS shelter system, which is the census of the numbers of people in shelter on any given night. But that's not the same 60,000 people who were homeless last year, or the same 60,000 people who might be in our system next week or next month. Our system is very fluid. We have moved a lot of people out with rental assistance and rehousing into the housing authority, but we also have other people that we reconnect to family and reunify with family with a little bit of financial assistance, for example. We have a program with, I think, the mayor and Jocelyn and I particularly love called Pathway Home. And Henry Garrido partnered with me. We sent this to every member of DC 37, which was to say, if you're a member of DC 37 and you have family and friends in the shelter system, the city can help you bring your family or friend to live with you and pay you some money to help you with your mortgage or your program. And we can certainly make Pathway Home information available to people here. But I didn't want, I'm sorry if I was misleading. It's not a static number, it's a static size. So we have people moving in and out of the system, either with our assistance directly into permanent housing or with other assistance that we give to help people reunify with family and friends.
Right, and I just have one last question. You had started answering the question by saying that domestic violence is one of the issues that brings people into the shelter system. What are some of the other issues that are causing people to, end up in a shelter? Because it's my personal thought that if we start to address some of the issues more intimately, then perhaps those numbers can drop more significantly, more over time.
So thank you for asking that. On the families side, so 70% of the people in shelter are in families right now. That's the majority of that 60,000 number. And by the way, 34% of the families with children in shelter have an adult who's working. So those are significant numbers when you think about it. Again, if you want to look for, a lot of this information is online in our Turning the Tide report, which you can get to off the mayor's website or off of our agency website. But in terms of families with children, the driver historically had been evictions through court proceedings. I'm happy to say that with the additional lawyers and paying more rent arrears than HRA had ever paid before, we've driven eviction in an actual eviction proceeding, a formal eviction proceeding, we've driven that down to about 11% of the entries are because of evictions. That used to be one of the big numbers. 30% of the families with children entering the shelter system have a history of domestic violence. So that's about 40%. And now I'm just going to oversimplify it with the other 60%. Those are really people that the gap between rent and income, they can't find housing in the market because of the statistic I threw out before. Rents have gone up almost 19%. Wages have gone up less than 5%. And if somebody is receiving public assistance benefits, so it relates back to the question earlier, if someone's on public assistance, their grant for like a family of 3 is $400. I don't know, has anybody found an apartment for $400 for a family of 3 in New York City? Nope. I didn't think so. I've looked all over for it. We have not found that one apartment. I don't know if you can get a parking space for $400 in New York City these days. So those are the drivers, the really economic drivers of family homelessness. Single adult homelessness, there's certainly an increasing percentage of people who are working. We have lots of employment shelter space. But there are other issues that occur in people's lives. There's mental health. There are the challenges that the governor was pushing back on us last week about people coming back to the city from upstate. There are a lot of issues around that. I'd say economics is the primary driver, and it's really that gap between rents and income, whether you're working or not.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to thank you. Ingrid's going to close this out, but I want to thank the commissioner and his team. And I think part of this conversation is around, when you look at some of the faces that are in this agency, they were the advocates. They made up the body of people who fought for housing for people for years. And now they're trying to really, which is a difficult task. It's easy to put a Band-Aid on a cancerous sore, but it's going to spread. They're trying to change the paradigm of what homelessness is. And if they are successful, It's going to impact the entire country. The country is wrestling with homeless issues. And here, the largest city in America is going to have a major impact on what's being done nationally. But I'm also encouraged by, as I listened closely to your comments, there was not one sentence that started out with, "We don't want homeless here." Your sentences started with, what I think is important, and I'm going to encourage the commissioner to do even more so, communication. And I want to encourage you to give him suggestions on how to better communicate. I always tell a story about my uncle who used to squeeze my hand when I was a little boy, and I used to tell him it hurt, and he'd say, "Son, that doesn't hurt. You're not getting your hand squeezed, I am." And, you know what you are feeling. And nothing, I think, could be worse than when someone dismisses what you're feeling. So if you're feeling as though, hey, we're not being communicated, we need to hear that. And we need to figure out how do we go about making sure you're communicated with. Because we can do this together, but there will be no greater impediment than if you feel as though you've been treated in a disrespectful manner, which some of the city agencies do when it comes down to our community boards. And we don't want that here. And I'm encouraged by Councilwoman Palmer being part of the team now. I think that you should take advantage of that, understanding the importance of constituent service. And let's continue to move together and solve this problem. I'll never forget the police officer who called me because his mother and father, lost because of the illness, they lost their housing, and they were in a homeless shelter. These are everyday people. Some of these folks have jobs, and they just can't afford rent. These are everyday people that have fallen on hard times, and we need to figure this out together. How do we fix this problem? And yelling, screaming is not going to resolve it, but doing what you did today, having very reasonable, sensible questions. And what I'm encouraged by in my meeting with the commissioner, we had a conversation about having someone like Sam come on board. The commissioner didn't come into the meeting with that, but he left saying, "Hey, Eric, let me look at that." And he contacted me and said, "Listen, that's a good idea, let's do that." They started out with this program, and I intentionally asked the question that they were going to only place people back in their community boards, which I thought was unfair, that people need to be near their homes, and if you live in Prospect Heights and lost your housing, there's no reason you can't be placed in a location in Park Slope that is near your home. So it shouldn't be just community board specific, because let's face it, many community boards have been decimated with the displacement of people. And so we cannot continue to dump those services in. And then we need to look at the question that was asked about education. Someone asked a question about Department of Education. If I have a school where a substantial number of the children in there are homeless, then the services and the funding needs to compensate for that. We need to compensate for the fact that, the burden that these children are needing and wraparound services they need. You cannot give the same funding to a school that has to a community that has a high level of homeless children to a school that has little or no homeless children at all. That does not make sense. And then we need to also look at how do we ensure we enhance the police department to make sure that public protection, if ever there has been a symbol of how to do it wrong, Bedford and Atlantic is that. And then we need to ensure that every person in the shelter has somewhere to go, to job training, how to write a resume, how to dress for success, how to go on job interviews. The life can't be standing on the corner, because that leads to giving up on yourself, giving up on the system, and it leads to returning to, as we saw, which is a horrific stat, the number of people who were formerly incarcerated returning to homeless shelters. We can't have homeless shelters become ancillary prisons. on the corners of our community. So these are tough topics, tough topics. And, you know, we're not going to agree with everything the commissioner says. You know, I tell people all the time, I don't agree with everything I say. But one thing's for sure, the man has committed and dedicated his life to this. This is his life's calling. And those who know him know that this is what he has spent his life doing. And you don't change that calling merely because you become a commissioner. You try to make it better based on what you thought your vision would be. It's a tough job, difficult job, but together we can make a substantial impact and finally deal with the issue of homeless. So I want to turn it over to Ingrid. Ingrid, thank you for holding down the meetings. And thank you, Commissioner. Thank your team.
Okay, so again, we want to thank Commissioner Banks. We want to thank his team for coming. Thank you, Borough President. I just want to add one thing to what the Borough President said, because I don't think that the magnitude or the scale of what he said is truly understood. When the Borough President first had his meeting with Commissioner Banks, the Borough President expressed to the Commissioner how important it was to have an on-the-grounds liaison between the Commissioner's office, Borough Hall, and the community at large. And we have Sam. So Sam, before you leave, I want you to please, if you have your cards, to give your cards out. I know you met with them before. You didn't have cards at the time, or you can share your number where they can reach you at directly. I also, we're not on the opposite side, the BP and me, when it comes to shelters. I advocate for affordable housing. So that's my bailiwick. And as I explained to you, Matt, that's not my thing. So I'm the affordable housing advocate. So, but I want to thank you for coming. Well, yeah, the love is mutual, you know. The love is mutual. The whole idea is to go from the shelter into affordable housing. I just want to go straight to affordable housing. So that's the only difference. So I want to thank you, Commissioner Banks. I think you did an awesome presentation. I do want to thank the members of the Borough Board. You did an awesome job. I told the Borough President that he didn't have to worry, that the decorum of our representatives on behalf of the council members, on behalf of the community board is always stellar, and that the commissioner would have been treated with every courtesy. So I want to thank all of you, and I thank you again, Commissioner.
Thank you all very much.
You're welcome
We appreciate it.
anytime.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so now, Sam, you're going to give us? Thank you. Sam, please let them know.
Yes, I'm still waiting for cars very soon. But you can reach me at 718-802-3846. Again, the number is 718-802-3846. The email address is Clark, CLARKESA at hra.nyc.gov. CLARKESA at hra.nyc.gov. Sam Clark.
Thank you. And I don't want to remiss Perry. You should all know Perry also if you don't, because he works hand in hand with Sam. I believe he's Sam's direct supervisor. He keeps us well informed, and he's really on the ground. And I want to just thank you, Perry, for all that you have done to help make tonight possible as well. Thank you. Okay, so we didn't reach quorum. We're too short. So that's going to be a problem. I'm going to tell the BP. So we can't vote to adopt the minutes, which we wanted to do. I just want to thank all of you for coming. I want to just remind you about the march, the Students' March on the 14th at the Prosper Park Band Shell. I'm not sure, but you may be asked to approve a resolution which talks about sexual harassment on some level. I'm not sure what the resolution will say or what it will entail, but our office is thinking of crafting a resolution that deals with the issue of sexual harassment, I believe, in the workplace and the schools and things of that sort. So that may come before you at the next Borough Board meeting. At this point, would anyone like to make any comments? Teresa, please.
I just want to thank you. You are
Thank you.
always complimentary to us.
I love you guys.
You never hustle us in and try to hustle us out. And thank you for tonight. It was
I love you
lovely.
guys. Thank you.
It was really nice.
Thank you. Thank you. I love all of you, and I wish all of you safe travels. But oh, I forgot. That's for the kids or everybody? That's for the kids. Yeah, but they should have. All right, Kathleen probably should have too. Thank you. David just reminded me that on the, you know about the 14th, on the 24th, we're having, I think 2 buses or 3 buses, I don't know how many buses, go to Washington, D.C. So you do know.
Yeah.
Oh, she did talk about it. Kathleen did talk about
Kathleen
it. Okay.
did.
So I wasn't sure because my mind was preoccupied. Okay, but for those who've come to the meeting late, we're having a march on the 14th at the Prospect Park Band Shell, 2 o'clock. I believe there's flyers. It's youth-oriented to call for an end to gun violence. And on the 24th, there will be buses deployed from Brooklyn going to Washington, D.C. with the same message. So we ask that you share that with your young people and you get them involved, engaged, and motivated. They may also be looking for chaperones, I'm not sure, but you can always contact us. You have the flyer, you know how to reach us, and I want to thank all of you. So I guess the meeting is adjourned. May I have a motion? We didn't even have a motion to open it up.
Motion to adjourn.
Who made the motion to adjourn? Richard Flateau. Who's seconding it? Teresa Scavo is seconding it. Can we vote? Maybe close out? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? I'm opposed because I don't want you to leave. No. Have a good night. Thank you.